So, dear friends, thank you so much for coming to our TEC conference. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Wilmer Hale, our hosts, and Deutsche Telekom and Virsta for supporting us and helping us organize our events. TEC is an entrepreneur club that was founded in 2003 by Stas Hirman, and basically that was a group of people inviting friends of a friend. And right now the organization has grown to the point that we have over 5,000 people in our network. So please join our LinkedIn and Facebook groups and be active and come over to our events. Today we have 16 companies pitching to the audience of the venture capitalists and angel investors, and these are the countries that these founders came from. And let me now announce our keynote speech. The person who is very dear to us, who is considered to be a godfather of the Silicon Valley, Peach Johnson. Let me just say a couple of words. So, Peach co-founded Draper and Johnson Investment Company in 1962. That was a venture fund, and then became an independent venture capitalist in 1965. When he founded asset management company. And asset management company since then made over 250 venture investments during more than 43 years of operating. And these investments include Amgen, Applied Biosystems, Sierra Semiconductor, Tandem Computer, Red Brick Systems, and Verity. He was the director of many of those companies and is presently director of 3 private companies and a public investment fund operating in Eastern Europe. Peach, welcome.
I have to figure out if I'm in a church or not. I have to bow when I go across the front, but I don't. Okay, thank you. I always love it when they mention the successful deals. I could also give about the same number that didn't make it, but I won't inflict those on you. So what I'd like to do this morning is traditional to ignore the subject you're assigned, and I'm going to do that pretty much. But here's what the assigned subject was. I think you gentlemen and ladies will be amused. I'm supposed to talk about I'm sorry, I missed it's here, somewhere here. Well, I'll have to skip it then. But anyway, it's has to do with tales of venture capital and stories about venture capital. And what I'd rather do is talk about something else, but not to entirely skip the subject. I thought I would tell a couple of venture capital tales, which I'll tell 2 different ones. One is almost venture capital, and one is certainly venture capital. But like everyone here in this room who's been out of school for more than a couple years, and I see Mark and some of the guys who have been out, you realize how many things are chance, how many things are things you did that turned out to be right, even though you did them for other reasons, and of course things turned out to be wrong. But I thought since Amgen is one of the more successful and best known companies I got involved in, I thought I might go back on a little historical trail about my own involvement in Amgen, how that happened, and how it got going. First of all, it just shows you the importance of personal friendships and connections. But when I was at Stanford as an engineering student, I was a good friend of a guy named John Bowes, but he had a brother named Bill Bowes. And Bill had come back from the war. If you remember what war I'm talking about, it's World War II. And so we became friends. I really am going to this threads because you don't know, without all these threads together, where the fabric would have been woven that permitted me to be involved in Amgen. So I became a friend of Bill Bowes, and we all went off to the business school back east, Harvard Business School. stayed good friends. And after business school, I went in the Air Force during the Korean War period. Got out, and because I wanted to be a production guy, I got a job in a steel mill, a sort of ordinary job to start with, shoveling stuff. But I then became a foreman, which was supervisory work, and finally became a general foreman. But that took 8 years. And during that course, I met Bill Draper, who was a salesman for the same company where I was a production guy back in East Chicago, Indiana. And we lived in what they call company houses. We all had, shall I say, fairly small salaries, so the company provided housing at reasonable rent in company-owned houses near the steel mill. My wife wasn't quite ready for a constant bath of cement dust from the nearby cement plant, but that's what it was. So there's two acquaintances became important, one from school and one from business, from a colleague, in both living and in business. So then Bill asked me to join him in a venture fund in 1962, which Anna mentioned, Draper and Johnson, and he had worked for his dad in a pioneer venture fund starting in '58. So here's another thread coming along. So I get in the venture capital business with Bill Draper, and I wouldn't have been in this business. I would hope I might have been at least a superintendent by now back in the mill. I would have been retired, by the way, by 20 years. But I then, when I was in school, I was an engineer, loved technology, and I thought I was going to be a physics major, but I realized I wasn't Robert Oppenheimer, so I settled for mechanical engineering, which was tough enough, and thermodynamics, which excited me and interested me. Then I began to read about the new developments in biology. A good friend of mine in high school's grandfather had developed the idea of genes. His name was Thomas Hunt Morgan, and he developed the idea of a gene, won the Nobel Prize, and all that sort of stuff. So I had these little threads coming in that interested me, and so I decided I'd take, at Stanford, if you graduate in good standing, and I did, you can enroll and take courses again if you want to. So I took 3 courses. One was a course in molecular biology, which didn't exist when I graduated. The other 2 was a course in computer science, which didn't really exist, and a third one was in partial differential equations, which I took it, but it didn't take me very well. So I knew I wasn't going to be a physicist anyway. But those 2 courses, I won't go why the computer course became important, although it is obvious why that might be. But I became aware of, and in running experiments, that you could actually insert, this is nothing now, but I'm talking 1964, that you could insert the genes from human beings into other organisms, in this case, Escherichia coli, a visitor we now have in our guts once in a while that we don't want. But so I became aware, it didn't take much thinking to realize that if we could create hormones being made by other organisms by putting in genes from people, it could have a very valuable application. I wasn't really thinking markets. I learned a little later, which I'll get into in my regular talk, about markets and how important markets are to have in the front of your mind. But I thought, gee, if you can do this, think how many drugs you could actually make. I was thinking not of new markets so much, but of things that could be done. So not much happened more. It was in the back of my mind. And then in 1972, things became a little... I was on my own making investments. I needed an associate, so I hired a guy named Brooke Byers, who was working for a semiconductor company, to come and be an associate of mine in my office, which was, of course, next door to my house, actually, at that point. Then about I get up in the middle of the 70s, let's say 75, why Brooke said to me, my roommate, whose name is Bob Swanson, has developed an idea to build a company built around genetic engineering. Well, this lighted me up in a hurry. Both those gentlemen improved their roommates a lot in subsequent years, I might add. So I said, Brooke, we really ought to get involved in that. So he had a long talk with Bob, and they decided that this is Genentech we're talking about in this case. We decided, Brooke said, Pitch, I'd really prefer it if I didn't get involved in a deal with my roommate. And who didn't? I knew it was a great area, but I didn't know it was going to be Genentech. So I sort of said, good guy. Oh yeah, well, okay. I thought it was a really bad decision. A couple of years later, it turned out to be a great decision because. So we didn't get involved in Genentech. It was the first of the biotech companies. I'm sure most of you know that. So then, about 1980, Bill Bowes, going back to that other thread, who was doing private deals like I was, said, I've met this guy from UCLA who has an idea to start a company to do genetic engineering, and he gave me 4 product areas that they thought that they could make using genetic engineering. And so, I thought, well, this is my chance now. And if I had been in Genentech in a minor way, I wouldn't have been able to get involved in Amgen in a major way. So I'm trying to mention all this because it all seems so organized, it all seems so straightforward when you look back, but it's not at all straightforward. Every one of you has these threads and connections and things in your life that are going to steer you toward or away things. So you can call it luck, and you surely can call part of it luck, but part of it, anything, is knowing when to move on when a good opportunity comes along, which might be luck, to not ignore it or be ready to take advantage of it. So I think I'll shorten this down before it gets too boring, but it's a sort of an interesting piece of history in the venture capital. So I said, Bill, I'd love to join you in that. He's a good friend. We've done other deals together anyway. And so I got involved in Amgen in the late spring of, later on in the year of 1980, a month or two after Amgen was formed, and Bill had already formed the corporation. And without going into the detail, that worked its way into the modern day Amgen from 1980 to now. I was on the board 27 years. It did very well, and I have a little family partnership that met once in a while. And after Amgen became successful, my very wise 14-year-old said to me, Dad, why did you do all those other deals? And that was a pretty good question. I didn't give him much of an answer. But the reason that, since I was assigned these Tales of Silicon Valley kind of thing as my assigned topic, I thought I'd tell at least one tale that is sort of, it's a good example of how things happen. Why did that opportunity came along? Partly by luck. How did I happen to know Bill Bowes in college? That was luck. How did I happen, actually I went to Stanford to run. I didn't really go to study engineering because I was a track athlete. I went for both, actually. Stanford's a great place, as Andrew Luck would tell you. I can't compare myself to him, but you can do both. And I was able to be a good engineering student and a pretty good athlete at the national level, if not international. So then that's sort of luck. And going to Harvard Business School, I scrambled around to get in. It wasn't easy for me. So then that resulted in further acquaintanceship with Bill, and that ended up. Then I think one good move I made on my own initiative was to go back and take that course in genetic engineering. At least it seemed exciting enough and interesting enough to go do that. So those things came together. But how I happened to go to work for Inland Steel and met Bill Draper, which is how I got in the venture business in the first place, that was almost luck. But saying I'm going to quit this job I love, because I love the mill, I love the men that I worked with, and so that was not luck. But the reason I'm going at length here is because it's sort of how things work. When you're 83, you start looking back as much as you look forward, which is sad. I do understand that. But every man and woman in this room will has had some opportunities come along. Some you've blown, like I have, and some you've taken advantage of, and some things came to you almost by fortuitous. Some of them came because you positioned yourself in a place for good things to happen or for something to happen. That's a lot like dating. It's the same kind of problem. So I went on a bit long, but I thought it was a good introduction to talk in more general terms about the venture capital business, about entrepreneurship internationally, and I do have some organized things to say. One other thing I thought was interesting, it just came up, I hadn't thought about it in a while. It's only interesting, it doesn't demonstrate anything, but in 1985, I was asked to go down to Cuba, give a talk about biotechnology to a group of people there, and my wife Kathy came with me, and we stayed in a lovely home. It had been stolen from some sugar baron. felt bad about that, but not real bad. So I gave my talk, and so at 6 p.m., that's what I basically said to these biotech lab managers and a few, I presume, there were some guys in uniform, had to be a few politicians, almost certainly some people listening, as they do in those kinds of countries. So at 6 o'clock, and I said basically, if you would take these labs that you have and you would give stock to the bosses and to the workers and form companies and then raise some money, obviously outside of the United States, raise some money and bring it in, you could probably build some pretty good companies here, because I wasn't thinking as much in markets. Well, I was by then, but the markets you can serve with these products are worldwide. And if you can build good companies and get this product sold, you could really do well with these companies. And whether you know it or not, I didn't at the time, Cuba has pretty good science down there. They put a lot of money into science. They have good scientists. They have good educated people. They actually have pretty good health care at a kind of a moderate level. But so I did my talk and had a few questions. And then so at 6 o'clock comes along, and somebody drives up in a car to us and says, the Comandante would like to see you. Well, in Cuba, I wanted to do it anyway. So I said we'd be pleased if he'd like you to come at 10 p.m. So I went over there at 10. Kathy and I went, along with another couple who was on the trip for other reasons. And so we sat down and shook hands, and then Castro spoke for an hour plus, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, without stopping, about how bad the embargo was, and how he had achieved social justice in his country, and how the United States couldn't stand that, and that we had the embargo to keep them down, which we certainly did do. So I listened and listened, and one interesting sidelight is my wife can't stay awake after 10 p.m. So here she is with the president of a neighboring country going. So finally her head stayed down for good. I didn't bother her after that. So so when he stopped speaking, he said to me, Mr. Johnson, my Spanish is good enough to understand him, but he had a perfect interpreter, a really honest, straightforward, every word right kind of interpreter, and she was just terrific. So he said, Mr. Johnson, I hear you gave a talk. My son was at a talk you gave today. His son, they call him Fidelito. Was that your talk? Would you mind telling me what you said? I almost said, Mr. President, you know every word I said by now. Don't tell me this. So I told him the same stuff that I told the group. He said, well, I've just spent some time, which is certainly true, telling you about how the things we've done have given our people social justice, and if I did what you suggested, some people would have more money than others, and that would not be social justice. So I said, Mr. President, if some people have more money than others, but everyone is better off economically, couldn't you call that social justice? And he said, very coldly but not hostilely, Mr. Johnson, I know those arguments. So then I tried to make a little joke in Spanish. Sin embargo in Spanish means nevertheless, but sin embargo could also mean without an embargo. So I tried to make a little joke about that, and he didn't smile. I didn't get anywhere with that. So then we had a conversation that went on, and I would describe him, he was not well. He wasn't smoking any cigars, and he was sort of gray, and I understand later he's had really gone a long way back in Alzheimer's, so he's kind of out of it. This is just what I've heard. I have, of course, no evidence of that. The reason I brought this up again, it's sort of part of my assignment, but it was an example of a venture capitalist taking a venture capital point of view to another country, which I've done a lot of, as Mark knows, and the reaction I got from a then active communist leader about his approach to it. Now, since that time, they've loosened up a lot there, and when I got back here, by the way, I gave a talk at the Hoover Institution about the very things I told you, and the Hoover Institution is known as pretty conservative in most cases, but one of the scholars there believes our embargo is really a bad idea, and it's been hurt us as much as them, or maybe more, but the power of the Cuban expatriates in New Jersey and in Florida is so great that the politicians just can't ignore that. So I think those two stories will have to suffice, but they are anecdotal. They may be interesting. So I have two things I'd like to talk about in a more organized way. One is some general, I gave a talk in Russia a couple of years ago, and it resulted in a paper being published by the Hoover Institution about entrepreneurship and democracy and how they're so tied in together. And as a matter of fact, just by a curious coincidence, I brought about 8 or 10 copies of this. So when I'm done, if anybody wants, feel free to take one, although you will have heard most of it in the next few minutes. Then after that, a second thing I'd like to get into is where the venture capital business is, where I think it might be going, and how it's changing. One of the problems with inviting an 83-year-old to talk to you, you tend to think that the history is really important. It is important, but what is really important is where are we going? Now we're building on the shoulders of the guys before us. The venture capital business didn't have much origins, so those of us who were stumbling around in the early days trying to figure out what to do have made some mistakes and did some good things. So I want to talk about the future a little bit, and I'd like to talk about, before I do that, I'd like to talk in general about why the various kinds of freedom are important, why economic freedom and entrepreneurship are vital in the world, and then what effect that has had, and then later on what it will have. So let me, the clicker works. I want to make 6 points about what entrepreneurs do, and I want to emphasize the word markets. Entrepreneurs are not solely people, not primarily people even, who understand technology, but they understand enough technology to know when a market can be served or can be created. Then you have to have a series of conditions which are present, or entrepreneurs do not thrive, and I'll go into those. Entrepreneurs are very much the product of economic freedom, and I'll certainly make the point that economic, personal, and political freedom are so closely allied, they have to coexist. Now, we all know it doesn't have to at the same time, but China is an example which I'll get into. How to give yourself a mentality, how people can get a mentality of creating and innovating, how that attitude of innovation and creation of new ventures comes. It's not primarily actually from technological exploits, although technological exploits enable new ventures. But innovation is a terribly important subject now. And then I made this point earlier, personal, political, and economic freedom are inseparable. And then I want to talk about some new directions for entrepreneurship and venture capital. So let me just check the time I got. Supposed to be done by 10:15. Oh, we got time. What entrepreneurs do, they are driven as much by markets as they are by technology. In other words, technology enables it, but technology by itself is a great thing for university scientists and science to do. But the job of the entrepreneur is to bridge that gap between technological advancement and creation of new markets or serving new markets, either one. Sometimes old markets are served better, sometimes brand new markets occur. I can see that, of course, by the iPads sitting on these tables. And venture capital doesn't have much meaning by itself. I've often been visited by people from other countries and who say, how can we get venture capital going? So my answer always is, tell me what environment you have for entrepreneurs. Do you have a place where entrepreneurs want to form companies, where the situations are right for that? So venture capital doesn't mean anything until there's some entrepreneurs that you can back. So there's 3 things I want to define. We always think about venture capitalists being guys and women who provide capital for formation and growth, but there's 2 other really important functions. The other one is sort of obvious, and that is the consulting and help. Practically every deal you go into, either you or someone in a closely associated firm is working with the management, is on the board, makes frequent visits. I'm talking about startups now, And one reason I believe venture capital is a local business is you got to be there. Now, you can have branches in other places. Tim Draper has created who will speak to you later today, has created a worldwide network of venture capital companies. But what we do in our firm, we're not a firm that raises a lot of outside money, a little bit, but mostly our own money in our own office. But we do deals mostly on the West Coast. We got to be able to get to them, drive to them, visit them, or in the case of San Diego, fly down to them, or Seattle. But we of course, like everybody else, we make exceptions. So we have a deal in New York City, of course, and one in Denver. But basically, you got to be able to visit them to help them grow. So the advice and the guidance. But there's another factor that I wanted to bring out, and that is that entrepreneurs, almost every one of them, they may not have been athletes, but they're all athletes in their heads. They want to win. Sure, they want to make money. They want to succeed, but they're the most competitive people in you'll want to meet. There's hardly anyone that's successful who doesn't have this desire to be a winner, desire to be successful, a guy to beat the opposition, the guy to win the race, the guy to tackle the other guy and all that stuff. They really have that kind of mentality, and on the venture capitalists have to know how to reinforce. They have to be coaches. Look at your football coaches. We see them all over the place now. Look how successful Jim Harbaugh is. It's partly technical. It's partly because he instills in his teams, first at Stanford, now at the 49ers, a whole new way of competitive thinking, of believing in themselves. So the job of venture capitalists is at least the third one, not discussed much, but certainly understood by the venture capitalists, is that of coaching and encouraging the competitive nature of the kind of people that are going to win. So these are semi-obvious, but the entrepreneurial climate which you may want to establish in any country, if you are in the government or if you are a legislator or any way of influencing it, some of these things the government can help with, some of them are cultural. But first of all, you need a system, and I can say this right in the middle of a law firm, you need a system of law to form entities, protect property and contracts, and give work to lawyers. So that's the important factor. Then another thing that has to be present is a strong educational system. In other words, it's not just the training of scientists or engineers that create the technology, it's the training of people in all the in production, especially marketing and market thinking, and in organizations, and producing the various skills that are needed to support entrepreneurship. Well, strong educational systems. One reason that Silicon Valley grew up here, other than the great weather, which we are having this week, by the way, was that we had starting with two great research universities, now a third one, Stanford, Cal, and UCSF. The presence of those places, the spin-offs they've had with people starting companies is endless, and I won't even start naming it, except we're on the very street with where Hewlett-Packard is, so I have to mention that. But the educational system is strong, and we're busily, carelessly, pick a word, dismantling the strength of the University of California now. It's almost unbelievable what's happening to that university. Professors are leaving. I'm not so much worried about the students in the streets jumping up and down about not having low tuition. I'm worried about the support for the University of California. I was talking at the Stanford Cal football game with the chancellor. Only around 7-8% of the budgets of our state universities, is true at UCSB, come from this. Let's say under 10%. They're almost private universities now with government grants, U.S. government grants, with tuition, with endowment. University of California in total has a huge endowment. So maybe it is a gradual privatization, maybe not. But a lot of good faculty are not coming to and are leaving the University of California campuses. Not that the troubles aren't in other places too, but we really have to be sure we keep this educational system. Another level in California, of course, is the state college system now called the California State University, San Jose State, San Francisco State, Hayward State. Those places have really good engineering education, and people can take business there, so you have marketing people coming out of that. And then let's not sell a community college short. That is the two-year colleges which do a lot more than that, which provide technical training for all kinds of technicians, which provide a bridge between high school and college for many, many students, and little recognized is their role with grown-up people, grown-up with older people going back and getting retraining in things they want to learn. So we have this community college system. I believe it's 105 community colleges, good academically, the college system, and our research universities, including the great private schools of our state as well. So and directly related to that is a fund of talent and knowledge. In other words, I call it a pool of talent and knowledge, but some people get confused by the word pool, so I just say fund, but whatever. You have to have a mass of talented people, some of which come out from other companies. You have to have this science and the technology, and you have to have this amount of knowledge from which people can draw and which they can grow up. And then another one is, which is not much of a problem in California, but is a problem in other countries. You have to have very few restrictions on forming companies and choosing markets. It's really important that the free markets work. It's very important that if I want to start a company within certain, obviously, ethical and moral areas, I should be able to start a company to do anything I want to. And I don't need, I'm speaking for the world, don't need the government to say, oh, we'd like to have companies in this area, like to have companies in that area. But most people don't have money, so then they got to find venture capitalists who have the ultimately pure motive of trying to make money. And so this bargain between people starting companies to serve markets that they see and venture capitalists who want to back people if they believe have the ability to serve the market, who are willing to work with you and take advice was something we look for and have the high integrity, and then have the kind of desire to win that goes with being an entrepreneur. But this match between entrepreneurs free to start companies they want and venture capitalists free to back companies they want, sometimes venture capitalists need some financial help without, if not necessarily direction. So governments have some role to play in this, but not in directly backing companies or doing venture capital themselves, in my view. Another thing that's necessary is to have availability of venture capital. In other words, you got to have at least some institution where people have money and then have the willingness to invest. We take it for granted around Silicon Valley. There's lots of venture capital companies, maybe not as many as there were last year, but a lot. Then these other ones are more obvious. You have to have commercial investment banking service. You have to have banks, in other words, people that can give you short-term borrowing. There has to be an institution of lending and of services from investment banks. Another one that's important is, and that's really slow now in the United States, although Zynga may be an exception this week, access to public markets. Because when companies grow up, they run out of the ability of venture capital funds to supply them with growth capital. And also, people who've been in an investment for a while, both the founders and the investors, want a chance to get out of the deal. So that's where access to public markets and liquidity is important. There's a new phenomenon, though, that postpones the need for companies. Most companies who grow up successfully can go to private equity firms, which sort of a level above venture capital in terms of size, and get growth financing, but that doesn't help much with liquidity. So another phenomenon that has arisen is the private market. So a lot of people are buying and selling shares in Facebook, and there is no public market, at least for the moment, in Facebook. So the market fills in, but you can blame blame the laws, you can blame lots of things, but my own view is when the public realizes that good companies with actual earnings growth potential and a good place in markets can be backed and you can make money as an investor, we tend to go in these huge periods of enthusiasm like the late 90s and 2007 and 8. So we will have these cycles, but the boom and bust has been very strong, so it's been very difficult lately for any companies to go public unless some real all-stars. But the nice growing $100 million company to raise $25 million for growth, that's been a very difficult place to get liquid. Venture capitalists need to see liquidity. Most venture funds need to have can't go more than about 10 or 12 years without pretty much being finished. So the cycle time, it's a weakness in our business, and we solve that weakness by being a private venture fund, so we have deals too old, I might say, but we can go a little longer. We got a deal been in 25 years. Now, if we finish it, we'll cure type 1 diabetes, but it's been a long haul. I made these points already, actually. The only thing I would add to this, the governments can aid in the process. Let me emphasize that. They can provide extra capital for existing venture funds, as America did in the 1950s. How I got going was Bill Draper and I saved up a little money, borrowed some money from friends or family in our cases, and then we were able to get 3-to-1 leverage from the government by long-term loans. So, but the government let us make the decisions. They let us lose our money first, had we lost it. And so even our country, which was the sort of the bastion of free enterprises, had the government play a role in venture capital and entrepreneurship. But there's been lots of arguments in lots of places. Russia is the main place where this argument is going on right now. How much role should the government play? So the government has started an entrepreneurial center, but the guys who run that center, including an ex-president of Intel, have decided to have the government involved, but to have the private decisions made by private groups, so that they're risking their own money, and maybe the government's being risked alongside that or ahead of them. But Russia is grappling with this very problem. Russia, I won't give a talk about Russia because half the guys, not some guys, are here from Russia, and you know better. But how these elections come out, the power of a centralist like Putin, who likes to control things from the top, if that becomes the dominant force, it will not be good for entrepreneurship and technological growth in Russia. I would make that flat statement. Now, new ventures we want to think of them as works of art. It isn't a bad idea, actually. They're brand new thoughts. You can do it. You can create a venture inside of a company. If you work for a great company and they give you the freedom and the capital and the economic incentive, you can start finding companies within big companies. Doesn't happen very often. Mostly people leave. Hewlett Packard was a great example of where nobody ever left Hewlett Packard, but after a while, Tandem Computers came out of there and some other fine companies. But you have to have an innovative mentality, and we have to talk about Steve Jobs, because there's nobody ever been better at seeing a marketplace, imagining a marketplace. He knows technology. I don't think Steve was a great engineer. He had some great ones working with him, but what Steve did, he saw what could be done with computers, and he thought up the iPad. I'm not sure that he did it by himself, but he was the CEO, and he gets the responsibility for it. And he thought up, what do people need to do? What would they like to have? So you'd like to have something in front of you right now where you can bring up, are you reading a book there? No. So that could do lots of things. And so the iPad came, but look at the iPhone first. All the functions that went into your pocket that he had. And I think we can go on and on about Steve. We all know what he did here. But the main thing he did was to think of markets first. He thought about what technology can I use to serve a market, and what technology will enable me to serve a market I couldn't otherwise serve. So there's a guy whose mind went free. He had several periods in his life. He got fired from Apple for, I don't know all the story because I wasn't on the board or involved, but apparently he decided he didn't want to do what the board wanted to do, and so he went off and and had this computer called Next, and finally, after screwing around for a couple of years, they brought him back in. But he wasn't the same guy that left. He was a guy who was chastened. He was a guy who had thought up a lot of new ideas. So he went through a very low spot, I'm sure, in his life, he would call that. But it was a learning time. When he came back with lots and lots of good ideas, and all they were the iPad, the iPhone, and a new thin computer, and the iPad. So there, I want to go on and on about Steve because that would go on forever. But again, I'll say, just because you can't say it too often, emphasize markets. The front of your mind should be thinking about markets. Some of you are entrepreneurs, some of you are venture capitalists, I know, but all of you are interested in this idea of new businesses and innovative technology and doing new things in the business world. And size matters. There's no use putting this huge amount of effort into some venture that might grow to 10 million sales. Well, if the effort doesn't take any capital and that's what you want to do, that's fine, but you might as well, if you're going to go through all this invention and work, and you might as well try to build at least a company that's pretty big in size. That's why I'm saying size matters, because it's going to matter to venture capitalists. You go to a venture capital firm and say, gee, I think I can build a $5 million company here. I mean, it really won't be that big a welcome. But if you say I can build a $100 million company, which isn't so big these days, you might get some attention. So size does matter. Shoot big. Don't shoot impossibly or irrevocably big, but shoot big. Another thing to do, I would suggest, if you are running a company, and I'm telling things to you people who already know most of this, so forgive me, you got to give engineering and marketing teams a lot of latitude. When everything's managed from the front office, every engineer practically has to check in to see what this next project is. Try to build some really strong marketing teams, not just engineering teams, but have put a marketing person on the engineering teams. What we did at Teradyne, a company I was involved with for a long time in Boston, I might add, the president there, Alex Darbeloff, always assigned, when they would build a new product idea, they would put a team of engineers and marketing people, or at least one marketing person together for a new product line. If the marketing person and the engineers couldn't come up with a product that the marketing people thought could be sold well, even though it was a brilliant innovation or wasn't big enough, they wouldn't do the deal. So it was, that's just one example, but you have to form marketing engineering teams, or you can be part of it yourself if you're the company president and a good marketer, and then you have to give them a lot of room to maneuver and come up with their ideas. Product introduction. When you do that, there's nobody better than Steve Jobs again. Think of the drama when he gets up on the stage. You all have seen this, and he would say, one brilliant one when he introduced the iPhone. He said, "And all this power goes in your pocket." He took his Levi's, put the thing down in there, and people realized what he had done. He had put huge amounts of power into it. But when you do product innovation, you can get free publicity. You might make a big thing of it to try to make product innovation a big event, and then most everybody gets in trouble in young companies because they don't plan their cash flow very carefully. So that is, those things are important. Then another point I want to make, I've already made it, but these are not different freedoms. To my view, these are three facets of the same diamond, which is freedom, personal freedom. So what reason entrepreneurs need to have this is they're challenging existing structures. Every society that has strong entrepreneurs has generated new generations of wealth, new generations of power. You're challenging the way things are done, and our great entrepreneurs, going back into the rough and tumble 19th century, but even through today, those are not, those gentlemen and ladies who create these companies are challenging things. They're not worried about what somebody thinks. They're not worried about, they want to make a place for their company and themselves in the world. And new wealth and power is created, important to our society. I might add that we have a problem, I think I'll mention it later, about making this opportunity available more broadly. So when new generations can move ahead, of course, that's ideal. Personal, economic, and political freedom moves ahead. But new technology and new technology and new markets thrive when entrepreneurs are leading the way. And I gave a talk last October in Russia to 250 entrepreneurial students. And what I said, and did not get thrown out of the country, was, you men and women can change your country. There's several ways you can do this. First of all, you can you can think of new markets for your country. You can study technology, and you can learn to form companies, and you can learn to do things on your own. And I made a number of points, but one point I made was another thing you need to do, because President Medvedev had brought it up, you've got to be scrupulously honest from the moment you start your company. Don't be tempted by paying off somebody. Don't be tempted by taking the easy way. Stick together and do things honestly. Obviously they won't all do that, but if you could have a generation of new entrepreneurs who become powerful, who will not put up with the existing corruption that in not just Russia, of course, in many places, but these students can, I said, you can change your country. You literally have that power to do so. And they had an hour of questions, by the way, after the hour talk, which I will not inflict on you. But the guy that runs Rust Nano Anatoly Chubai, put this talk on his website, and it got more attention than I thought it would get. But I got a visa later, so nobody was that upset about what I said. So I just want to make a few more points before we have some time for questions, if our chairman would permit it. Entrepreneurs they start the process. Old areas are important to know about, but think of social networking. It's almost last year, but it's bridging the way to even newer areas. I wish I knew what they were. Our area, there's a guy at the Stanford Engineering guy called Paul Sappho. He has called this the creative economy. He said there was a production era when getting things into production was the most important, steel, oil, that, because the markets were there. The marketing era, when we thought carefully about where we were going with markets. In the era he calls now the creative area, where we not only are doing existing markets, but we're trying to create new markets, make new things happen, almost have new needs that people want to have. And the one thing he pointed out that one reason that some of the social networking companies are so successful, they get endless inputs, millions of little inputs every day from people who are saying one thing or the other about themselves. That information is sometimes misused, but basically he thinks that the secret of future will be to have easy access to some websites, let's say, and where people are tempted and want to tell things about themselves in very small increments. So I'm just going to make some predictions, and you can hang me with them next year. But portable devices will continue to be very, very important. Pretty easy to say that, I might add. Medical entrepreneurs, though, why a lot of the emphasis now is on the whole data-related stuff, products that people can bring up data and live their lives from. But medical entrepreneurs are terribly important. They're having trouble getting backing because the cycle time is long. From the day you start a medical deal until you get it done is a long time. And then venture capital firms, for those of you in that business, have to change yourself. In other words, there is no sort of set way of doing it. There are some things about venture capital that don't change, and I'll bring those up, but you have to think of markets. When you think of technology, you read an article, think to yourself, where could that, what do I know of? I'm talking about a venture capitalist that might be a good thing, so that when you're alert, when people come to you or you help an entrepreneur you can help him create a company, him or her, you think of the markets available at change. Then another thing that our firm sort of missed the social network because we're all too old. I mean, when I first heard about Twitter, I thought, what a great way for high school girls to talk to each other in the morning. It's only sexist, but it's ageist. Turned out, those guys helped create revolutions. I never thought about that side of it, and I missed that. And I introduced Jack Dorsey last year in a talk, and I introduced him I gave an award, which was happened to be named after me, but I composed a tweet, which I think I can repeat it pretty well. It says, many people start companies. Some people start fine companies. One man sent the first tweet and enabled revolutions to Jack Dorsey, the Pitch Prize. So that I gave him it as a tweet, and I know he has it on his desk. I was terribly honored that he did that. But that's the thing is, he saw far beyond what I could, or all these old guys around. The old guys in our office are like 45. We got in some deals, and I'm not saying we ignored it, but we didn't really see and jump all over the place to get in the hot deals of the age. So age of your people, I don't know whether you can take an old brain and old emotions and put them into a young status, but get some young people around. We've got a guy fresh out of school now who sees things in a way differently from what we do. I say for a venture firm, don't try to do everything. If you're really big, you can. Kleiner Perkins does just about everything pretty well, but try to pick an area or two that you want to focus on. Our focus in the new fund we're doing will be on the interface between medicine and information technology, and we'll deviate off onto those, but we're trying to find places where you can be very sophisticated uses of information technology in the medical field. And fund size, I mentioned, because tiny little funds, unless they're terribly focused. So you have to have at least a decent-sized fund, and make sure that you have enough people around to look after the deals. If you just have you can do a lot of deals in a small fund, you do a lot of deals in a big fund. So I would not fail to try my luck with a $20. That's really small, but say a $10 or $20 million fund. But the fund size is important, and make sure that the people that you bring in or that are already there are constantly focusing on markets. Markets are the problem, and markets are the answer. A few things of national policy that are too general for this, but I decided to throw it in the slides. We have issues of national policy, but the reason I brought this slide up, it's very important for us that these opportunities that we see in this room, people with education and opportunity, that we broaden that much more greatly. We've got to make sure the education system, starting in the early ages, is open up so that people, that they don't only hear this story of the opportunity that entrepreneurial system brings and economic opportunity, but that they create jobs for people that they can fill them. You don't have a huge group of people without enough education to take advantage of it. I don't mean everybody has to start a company, but companies can create lots of jobs. Almost all the new jobs, in fact, all the new jobs in the United States, it's always been true, in a 10-year period are created by companies less than 10 years old. So that old companies shrink and old companies grow, but young companies are the ones that build the jobs. We can't get people. We train people to get PhDs, and then they have to go home after a year. It's just we got to do better in finding ways to keep people and attract people into the country. But here's some things that aren't changing. The basic idea of venture capital is to provide capital, provide consulting, and provide, I call it coaching or commitment. You have to, the entrepreneur's got a sense that you give a damn winning and losing and not just making money. The first thing it's always important, it'll always be true, always was, the character and the honesty and openness of the entrepreneurs you back. Without that, you don't have a deal. A very wise old lawyer, one of the founders of Cooley Godward, a firm we use, if Wilmer will forgive me for saying that, said, we can write a lot of agreements, but if the guy, and he said guys in those days, if the guys aren't right, and you have to bring the agreement out of the drawer, you've made a mistake in the people you back. And then we have to create opportunities for liquidity. This is something that's an endless, sometimes it's easy when the markets are hot, sometimes it's hard like now, but we have to work to create liquidity either by mergers or by things going public. So that's about it. It took a little longer than I'd hoped, but I started with those anecdotes, so thank you. Do we have some time for questions? Is there a chairman? If there isn't, we still have time. We have more time if there's no chairman.
We have time for one question.
We do have a chair lady. Please.
So you were critical about the entrepreneurial environment in Russia. Nevertheless, asset management, I understand, made an investment through another company to invest in Russian companies.
What we did was, I'm sorry.
What was your consideration in doing this, and what it will take other VC companies to follow you?
Well, I don't know critical is quite the word. Russia's going through a period of transition, and there are some powerful, first you have the government, a tradition of a powerful government, and that is a negative about entrepreneurs. The second thing, though, is that they're conscious of, I and many other people have brought this subject up, so that the Skolkovo project, which is government-sponsored, is working on how to make it more, how to get private money or at least privately managed money in there. So that's the second area. But why did we start a venture capital fund in Russia? It was 1994 is one reason. And I didn't really start it. A guy asked me to help him get going, an American living in Britain. And so after all these years, it's coming up on 20 years in a couple, 3 years, we finally went through some difficult times. 1998 was really horrible, but we will have made pretty good money without writing home about. Of all this energy I put into Eastern Europe, that same energy gone into the United States might have produced a lot more profit, but it would be not half as interesting, and I've had a good time there. But the answer to your question is, we started early. It only succeeded at to a mild extent, and so. But I'm not involved right now in any new venture fund in Russia. A lot of people are, and a lot of people see it as an opportunity to make profits and to participate in an economy which is strong technically. There's very little thought about marketing I've ever heard there, and which has a shrinking population. That's the strategic issue, which is difficult. But the answer is, we did it to make some money. We will have made some money, but it was very interesting, but probably not worth all the effort. Is that it? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay, Anna? Did I get a hug? Oh, good. Thanks.